Yes, we are ready. You can start it.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for joining us on our third day for our Noon Talk technical presentation on mobility. Again, thank you for taking time out of your lunch to join us, and really looking forward to having you in our evening session. But I'll hand it over to Kaiser, our downtown consultant.
Hey, Ron, thanks a lot. Just give me a second. My printer just got activated. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I'm going to just turn it off. Sorry about that, everybody. Thank you, Ron. My name is Kaiser Rangwala. I'm with Rangwala Associates, and our team is helping the city facilitate the production of the downtown Baldwin Park specific plan. And we're on day 3 of the charrette, the final day, and we've saved the best for last for our noon talk, Tim Ernie. Let me just say about transportation. Transportation is the glue that I think holds our daily lives together. And when it goes all well, and we don't see it, but when you're caught in traffic or when things start going wrong, that's when it really colors our day and makes us angry, and to a certain extent gives us a sense of impotency in that it contains our possibilities that we want to have and things that we want to do for that day. So Anthony Fox, who is the past Secretary of Transportation under Obama administration and past mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, and now I think with Lyft, reminds us that the reality of transportation is that it is future oriented. And if we are planning for what we have, then we are behind the curve. So we're blessed to have Tim Ernie as part of our team. Tim is a senior planner, senior transportation planner with Kittleson and Associates. And with him is Phyllis Davis with Kittleson as well. And they're going to present to us a discussion on transportation, mobility, and parking to make sure that we're making the most of what we currently have, and then taking advantage of whatever the future has in stock for us in terms of transportation. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tim.
Thanks, Kaiser. We appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more today about mobility and parking throughout the Baldwin Park area. And in addition, looking at it more of what are some of the best practices that are happening on a national basis. And just kind of to start, we've done as a firm a lot of research with respect to mobility, connectivity, and the like. And there's a whole bunch of new things that are out there right now, a whole bunch of new technologies, a whole relooking at the way that people are using streets and infrastructure. And we're really excited about the opportunity to talk a little bit about those and see how they can apply to Baldwin Park in particular to really enhance the vitality and the vibrancy of this area. And there's also a strong connection between mobility and the surrounding land use and the urban form. They all work together. So we can have a great land use plan, like it's been mentioned over the last couple of days, with vibrant shopping districts and a great mix of uses and retail and restaurants and residential. But if you can't conveniently get to or from them, you're just not going to go. And you can have the most beautifully designed street, but if it doesn't meet the needs of the users, you're not going to use that street. So transportation is really what we consider to be the glue to tie everything together. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Phyllis to talk a little bit more about kind of that context, of mobility and circulation, and then I'll follow up at the end looking at parking and some new mobility technology options. So Phyllis?
Perfect. Thank you, Tim, Kaiser, and Ron. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. So streets really are the lifeblood of our communities and really the foundation of what makes our community a community. Across the US, streets are typically made up about 80% of our public space is our actual transportation system. Historically, our street network has focused on moving vehicles, which has caused congestion, safety issues, urban sprawl, and has really built our reliance on just driving. Our streets also have created physical and perceived barriers, such as limiting access or the feeling of potentially feeling unsafe. So perhaps there isn't lighting along the street. But our transportation system moves more just than vehicles. It has a potential to foster economic activity, improve public health outcomes, serve as a front yard for our residents, and really just provide a safe place for people to get to where they work, play, live, and learn, no matter what transportation mode they choose or use. So looking at our streets from a multimodal perspective, we're able to give people options so they can safely, attractively, and conveniently move by foot, by bike, by transit, by any type of mode that they see fit. But the street designs, policy plans, and recommendations that we develop ultimately affect how our communities are formed and how our people choose to travel. By shifting our focus from moving cars to a more people-focused approach, we can design a transportation system that really encourages, entices, and allows people to move comfortably, whether that's walking, biking, or rolling. If you just look at these two images on the screen, the image on the left is what we see across the country. It's a street simply designed to move cars down a road. Whereas the image on the right is a reimagined look at that road, of creating more of a vibrant space that really promotes multimodal use. It spurs economic development. It creates more of an active culture, and it just helps promote a better sense of place and community. By also shifting our focus from moving cars to moving people, we can also make our cities more efficient. When we look at streets, typically we measure how a street is performing by how many cars that it moves. But if we shift our perspective to how many people we can move, we can start to reallocate the space within our streets. Assuming that we have maybe 2 passengers in a vehicle on a single driving lane, one travel lane can carry about 600 to 1,600 people an hour, whereas a dedicated bus lane can carry up to 8,000 passengers per hour. So it's a very big discrepancy and difference in how many people you can move by what travel mode you use. These two diagrams illustrate how the capacity of a same street can be designed differently. The image on the left gives the majority of the space to single vehicles, whether they're parked or moving, whereas the right, the street is really designed to move more people by redistributing that space to different modes. You'll see wider sidewalks, a dedicated bike facility, and a dedicated bus lane. So this scenario, it not only increases the capacity of the street, it also allows us to have more space for seating or amenities along the sidewalk. So maybe trees or plants or public spaces. And it's important to keep this in context as our urban areas are increasingly becoming scarce in space. We need to really rethink about how we're using our streets to maximize the efficiency. Streets are also catalysts for urban transformations, but they needed to be developed to the unique user and land use needs along a corridor. You'll probably have heard of the term complete streets. Well, complete streets does move away from that vehicle-focused design to really incorporating that human experience into the street design. It provides multimodal connectivity, but it also helps to improve the aesthetics, the social, the economic, and the environmental needs of community. So what makes a street complete? The concept of complete streets is really placing the same priority on pedestrians, bicyclists, transit, as it does on motorists. It incorporates a wide array of amenities that improve access for all users, regardless of your age or ability. It really tries to create one cohesive space within the pedestrian and roadway realm to allow users to safely and conveniently travel. But the context of a street is also crucial, and it's often overlooked when we're designing our streets. One size does not fit all when it comes to complete streets. So we really need to look at what is the land use surrounding our street and what are the needs of the corridor. So let's look at some examples of different scenarios of a complete street and how they're tailored to different land use contexts. So this example shows a multimodal thoroughfare. So you can kind of think of Ramona Boulevard in this stance. So it's primarily focused on moving cars through the region or bringing them to their region. A lot of times you might see heavy traffic volumes, which could also limit or feel daunting to pedestrians trying to use that space. So we do want to look at it from a complete street perspective. So it's really trying to convert that space also to providing access for other users. So we can prioritize pedestrian facilities, bike facilities, transit facilities that really helps all people move through that corridor. A multimodal street, which multimodal Main, no pun intended, would be like Main Avenue right now in Baldwin Park. This really kind of creates a nexus within the community. It is your core kind of street that provides access to your local mom and pop shops and community centers. A complete street on a multimodal main street, it provides these bicycle facilities, upgraded street crossings, maybe on-street parking. It provides spaces for larger pedestrian spaces and street elements to really give that sense of place and comfort for those walking and biking. Neighborhood streets, that's probably what exactly pops into your mind are your streets within your communities, right in front of your house, or maybe on a low commercial street. They provide safe and inviting places for people to walk. They give you direct access to your schools, your home, stores. These are largely encouraged through safe speeds. Traffic calming measures are often implemented, and there could be space for on-street parking as well, and also including that really great streetscape element where it's either trees that just makes it more comfortable for you to be in that space. There's also commercial alleys, shared streets, and paseos. These can be designed to play an integral role into really making connectivity easier for pedestrians and cyclists in the downtown area. Shared streets maintain a vehicle's operations through it by promoting just low speeds through the area. These could be used just for loading or unloading during designated hours. Another idea would be creating a just pedestrian-only space. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to reconvert some alleys currently in Baldwin Park into these great shared spaces or paseos. But no matter what type of street we have, a critical element to looking at complete streets is providing equitable access to our residents. Vulnerable population groups such as limited incomes, the elderly, or persons with mobility limitations are more likely to lack alternative modes to vehicle travel. So that may limit their access to jobs, healthcare, social interactions, or healthy food. So creating access that it's reliable and affordable can help address some bigger community concerns that we have, such as poverty, unemployment, and public health concerns such as obesity. And one of those key components of equity and having street connectivity is the overall design and how connected our network is. Well-connected streets bring destinations closer together, they reduce travel distances, they help improve access, and really ultimately they just create a better sense of place. So if you look at Baldwin Park today, Ramona, Baldwin Park, Pacific, and Main, they really serve as the backbone of our transportation system. But there's also a network of smaller streets that improve connectivity and access. But in today's current superblock development, there is some limited east-west access. So, example, if I live in that dot on the upper left-hand corner and I want to go to the retail shopping center, I have to either travel north to Clark or down to Ramona to drive to that retail center. It may not sound like a big deal, but during peak congestion periods, this just really adds on additional stress to our street network. It also can limit potentially our pedestrian and bicycle access as well. So dividing these super blocks can really allow us for additional movement through in a downtown area. Another great way to improve access is to use our alleys and streets. The alleys between Ramona Boulevard and the Metrolink station is a great example of how we can convert that space into just a lively pedestrian alley that encourages and entices people to get off the train and to come to downtown Baldwin Park. Connections such as this help create a stronger grid-like system, and it just makes the blocks more walkable and helps promote urban development. And even if a street is connected, we need to make sure that we are designing the streets to incorporate the safety of users and their perception of safety. How someone feels their safety perception, whether walking, biking, or using transit, is critical to whether they choose to use that mode or not. For instance, if you're a confident cyclist, you might not be scared or intimidated to ride on a major roadway. Whereas a family with children, or truly honestly myself, I require a bicycle facility that has a little extra protection, safety, or comfort. So selecting the best bikeway facility on a given road can be really challenging, but we look at a range of factors that influence a bicyclist's level of comfort and safety. The image on your screen shows a continuum of different types of bike facilities, from least protected on your left to the most protected on your right. The shared lanes on your left can be used on streets that have low volumes or low speeds. So really in Baldwin Park, we're looking at kind of those neighborhood streets, or just low volume, low speed streets. Whereas on the right-hand side of the spectrum, you see the separated bike facility. This adds on another layer of protection that really removes the cyclist from the vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic. This type of facility would be a really great candidate on Ramona Boulevard. That's currently just one narrow bike lane. So this really would create a facility that would appeal to a wider range of users, not just your confident cyclists. On your screen, you can see a few examples of what that cycle track or separated bike facility may look like. So you can see it's really physically separated from motor traffic, and it's distinctive from the sidewalk, so you aren't having conflict between your different modes. These truly just provide a dedicated space for cyclists and improve their overall sense of comfort and safety. But it's really important that we also identify for these facilities the improvements at intersections. So this is where you can have conflicts with your cyclists, your pedestrians, and your vehicles. So you want to heighten the level of visibility and heighten the awareness between the competing modes. The protected intersection on the upper right-hand corner sets the bikeway back from the motor vehicle traffic, and it provides a dedicated space to allow the cyclist to travel through the intersection, giving them an extra sense of comfort and also giving an awareness to the drivers of, I have to look for a cyclist in this area. And we also have to look at it from a pedestrian's perspective as well. So our intersections need to be accommodating of crossings that allow pedestrians, no matter if they're unable to walk, if they might have mobility limitations, or if they're in a wheelchair. We need to make sure they're able to cross the corridors and have safe, convenient access. The image on your left shows a scramble. These are used in kind of high activity centers. So something maybe in the future that Baldwin Park, as it develops, maybe want to look into, where pedestrians are allowed to, when their designated time to cross, they can convert crosswise instead of going just straight parallel across the road. And of course, this is a transit-oriented development project, so we want to make sure that we're creating a high-quality transit network. A strong public transportation network is really key to having a great transportation system. As congestion continues to increase, creating this transit network allows more people to move, and we can really reutilize our public space to move more people. Currently, Ramona serves as both a local and regional transit route. So we want to develop a system, particularly on Ramona, that is easy to use, easy to connect to, and is frequent, reliable, and convenient for users. The transit services that are reliable and efficient bring more people to your cities. If it's slow and inconsistent, it could actually discourage ridership and really jeopardize the local benefits of having a public transportation system. The images on your screen show some examples of how we can accommodate buses within our system to have it be more frequent and reliable and convenient. Time spent for buses waiting at signals or at stop signs can really delay transit use. Bus bays like we have currently today in Baldwin Park, while they're really great for vehicle traffic, they really slow down buses, because once the bus is finished boarding or alighting their passengers, they must wait for breaks in the traffic to re-enter the road. So there's numerous ways to improve the frequency and reliability. Since bus bays prioritize vehicle movement, we can have curbside floating bus islands or pull-outs that allow a bus to quickly pull up to a stop and passengers can board the bus. These stops can also be designated to allow level boarding of passengers, so we wouldn't have to, put down the ADA ramp. It could just simply roll onto the bus. But the transit experience doesn't stop just at the bus stop. Stops and stations often are where existing and potential riders first interact with the transit service. So having a bus shelter is really critical to the overall transit system. We need to have safe, dedicated, and comfortable spaces. They also allow the city to provide opportunities to integrate placemaking concepts, have wayfinding systems, or help really build and promote transit usage. And bus stops also, excuse me, they also have the ability to improve the frequency of the transit routes. Dwell times related to passengers boarding and pavement process creates overall delays in the public transportation system. So having pavement options or public passenger information will really help streamline that access onto the transit system. It also just really makes it easier for users to understand the whole process and getting onto the bus, which might be intimidating for a lot of users. But really, transit system is only as good as the access to it. So in our world, we call this, oh, sorry, I apologize. I clicked one ahead. They also, this is a really great example of a smart bus shelter in Hollywood, California. So I was really excited about this improvement, because what this is they created their bus shelter in a way to really be in touch with our current modern environment. It uses technology to provide on-demand information about where the buses are at. But what I'm most excited about is that it has a USB charger station. So when you're sitting there waiting for the bus to come, you can still plug in on your phone or your laptop and do work. So it's a multi-use facility. But really, our transit system, like I said, is really only as good as the access to it. We call this first last mile connectivity. So transit stops need to be accessible via different modes, but particularly people walking and biking, as every transit trip typically starts or ends with someone either walking, biking, or driving to the stop. So improving walking and biking conditions increases the access of public transportation as well. So thoughtful integration of all these modes can really just improve the overall mobility and public transportation in Baldwin Park. So one really great way to extend the reach of the transit system is to integrate new and shared mobility strategies into the system. Recently, the town installed a shared use electric bike program that includes stations at Morgan Park, City Hall, and the Metrolink station. These electric bikes make it easier for people to travel long distances and really just help create a fun, active experience for residents and visitors. Across the nation, these e-bikes and electric scooters are becoming increasingly popular. But we want to make sure that when we install these facilities, we actually incorporate safety measures as well. So think back to the different bicycle facilities we talked about earlier. For these types of technologies, we would want to have more of a buffered or protected bike facility. So these e-bikes can really travel safely without conflicting with vehicles or pedestrians. But this is the one thing that we don't want to see when we install a e-bike program or e-scooter program. Having a scooter or a bike on the side of the road is just really one of your first steps of getting a public complaint at City Hall. So this is definitely what we don't want to do. So allocating designated parking spaces at smart and strategic locations make it easy for everyone to conveniently park their bikes or pick up a bike. This screen kind of illustrates a few examples for agencies in Southern California and across the country, how they're designating parking spaces. So for these e-bike programs. So you can see these incorporate, it could be in your current bike racks, or it could be designated space next to your bike facilities or on your curb. And a great way for coordinating all of these modes is to develop mobility hubs. Mobility hubs are really just a one-stop shop that connects all of the variety of modes, whether it's walking, biking, transit, or shared mobility, or car share as well. They all just come together in one place. These could be really large or ornate facilities, but it could also really be simple spaces like those seen on your screen. This just incorporates your bus stop, your bike share program, wayfinding, and placemaking. So it just creates one common place that I know when I see these facilities, I'm able to either bike, walk, or take a public transportation where I need to go. And mobility hubs can also have some extra amenities to really promote walking and biking. Some ideas that I've seen across the nation are having bike repair stations, interactive directories so people can look up restaurants or retail stores, or integrating a charging station so people can charge their phones, their computers, or their electric scooters. And another really great idea that people are using is developing a micro-transit system or a free shuttle system. And this really extends not just your public transportation reach, but the reach from from visitors and residents to Baldwin Park. Currently, LA County has a 3-year pilot micro-transit program at 6 service locations throughout the metro area. So micro-transit is essentially, it's combining an Uber and Lyft type ride sharing with public transportation. So I would use an app and I would be able to hail a ride, and a bus similar to the one on your left would pick me up, and then it would pick up riders along the route to drop us off either at the bus stop or a mobility hub. In San Diego, they developed a free Uber style shuttle service that allows riders within a small service area to call or use an app to have a free service to go to downtown. During their first year alone, they saw an increase to up to 1,700 riders per month. It's been very successful. And this could be a really great economic incentive as well for the region. And really just improves the overall mobility and incentivizes people to leave their cars at home and free up parking and reduce congestion on our roads. And with that, I'm going to head it over to Tim to talk about parking and curb management.
Thanks, Phyllis. I'll let you keep control of the slides, though, if that's okay. So parking is always a very hot button issue. It is super important that we provide parking to accommodate vehicles, but often it's prioritized over more active uses. Parking tends to stay empty for big portions of the day or only serves 1 or 2 cars a day. And that's not a very effective use of our limited resources that we have in areas like downtown Baldwin Park. So next. So there's been a lot of research that's been done about parking and the theory of parking and how much parking to provide. And noted parking expert Donald Shoup, and he has a lot of books out about this, has researched and identified that the optimum parking occupancy is 85%. And what that means is that on a typical block, there's always 1 or 2 spaces available, but it will take you a few minutes to find it. And that's a much more effective way to have your parking rather than to have spaces freely available, because there's a lot better things to do with those spaces. So as an example of the situation that we're looking at right now in our study area, we've shown this map before, but it illustrates where there currently is parking, and this is either public parking or private parking, and the typical occupancy of these spaces. In other words, how occupied they are, how many spaces are used at a typical midday time during the day. And as you can see, first of all, there's an awful lot of spaces, an awful lot of land that's been dedicated to parking. It covers basically the entire study area. And 2, you can also see by all the locations that are in green, there's a lot of spaces that are available. Once again, this is public parking and private parking, but you're seeing that there's a lot of spaces that are not fully occupied throughout the day. And these are locations where we could potentially do more and better things. So for instance, there may be opportunities to consolidate some of these parking areas and convert these spaces to public spaces, mobility hubs, open spaces, or to redevelopment for other uses such as new retail or restaurant or commercial spaces. But instead of just removing parking, going through and just taking parking away, we want to look at ways to efficiently park our neighborhoods and to make sure that parking is being provided in an efficient manner. And we want to look at what's the highest and best need for parking. So we look at, first of all, developing parking management strategies. And the first ones of these that we look at is called shared parking. And shared parking means that a certain parking space can be utilized by different uses over the course of a day. Large blocks can be consolidated to serve multiple businesses in this location. And shared parking is especially effective where you have mixed-use developments. An example of this would be an office building sharing a parking lot with a restaurant or a movie theater, since a lot of the office workers and their cars are gone in the evenings when you have that higher demand for parking from the restaurant or the theater. So as an example on the left, imagine if one of those buildings was an office building, one was a movie theater, one was a residential. All those spaces could be, instead of having separate cars parked for each building, you could reduce that amount of parking by a pretty substantial percentage and have less parking spaces available. And the graphic on the right shows the reduced number of spaces that could be required in a theoretical model versus on the left, it's the unshared parking. So what the parking demand would be for each use treated separately. And on the right, how those spaces and the time required for those spaces overlap. And as you can see, if you do individual parking, there's over 1,800 parking spaces that would be required. Whereas if you did shared parking, that number could be reduced by about 40%. Next. So if you are able to reduce the amount of space provided to parking, there's a lot of things we could do with it. We can create some very vibrant public spaces, and this can include things like parks, kid lots, space for farmers markets, retail kiosks, locations for food trucks, restaurant rows, mobility hubs that Phyllis mentioned, a lot of these things. And the thought behind this is to take these public spaces, because in fact, streets are public. A lot of the parking in downtown Baldwin Park is public. So take these public spaces and repurpose them for the public to enjoy in other ways. Next. So in addition to looking at shared parking, there's also opportunities to relook at how we're treating the curb. So we want to develop a curb management approach. And this is a plan that allocates the spaces on the curbs for a variety of different modes. So in addition to the people using the sidewalk, the curbs itself can accommodate things such as on-street parking. It can do pickup and drop-off areas for shared rides like Uber and Lyft. It can be areas to charge electric vehicles and a bunch of other things. This is all stuff we can do with the curbs if we're not providing just simply dedicated parking. Next. So one concept that has been really become more popular across the country is the ideas of curbs as flexible zones. So instead of just having a complete row of on-street parking, looking to see what else can be done in that space. So this is a plan from the city of Seattle that shows how they swapped out their definition of a curb space into a flexible zone. to account for all the different needs that curbs have. So this can accommodate different transportation and non-transportation options. So there's areas for passenger pickup and drop off. There's areas for deliveries, such as an Uber Eats type of a thing. There are parklets or small areas where you basically take a parking space and create a little outdoor space. And these have been found really effective outside of restaurants, especially right now when you're not able to have indoor dining. You can have these for nice, safe bus stops with the shelters and the information kiosks like Phyllis mentioned. Micro-mobility stops, once again, have these separate from the bus stops, but have dedicated areas where micro-mobility facilities could go. Information kiosks, bike parking, all these various things could be put upon the curb. So in addition to looking at shared parking and changes to the curb, we also want to look at smart parking. In other words, how can you better improve the efficiency of individual parking spaces? So smart parking can use in-ground parking sensors, cameras, or counting services to identify the number of vehicles coming in and the number of vehicles coming out of a lot, and identify which spaces are available for use. And you can see these sometimes at large parking garages, like at airports. You'll see they have a little light above a parking space to show that parking space is available, or there'll be a counter in the front of the parking garage that shows which level has parking available on it. So these kind of dynamic signs, dynamic lighting, and information systems are really beneficial to users and can help, once again, improve the efficiency of parking. So in addition to that, there's also secondary benefits. So tends to be less traffic because there's less traffic for cars circling around a neighborhood or circling around a parking lot looking for parking. There's less time that it takes to find parking, which can reduce stress for drivers. Roads are safer because since you know where your parking space is going to be, you're not going to drive slower trying to look for parking and maybe miss a pedestrian or a bicyclist going by. In addition, the data is really beneficial for cities because they could use that to look at trends, to see where the parking hotspots are, to see how much parking is needed to provide for various uses, and to make really good informed decisions about the future of parking in a neighborhood. So that covers parking. And the last thing we want to talk about today is new technologies. And these are what we call transformational technologies. And there's a couple different categories of this. First, these are things that are evolving new applications of science, engineering, and societal organizations, transforming how people and institutions use land and transportation systems, and how collectively how they influence how people use right-of-way, curb space, and transportation facilities. So some examples of transformational technologies are connected vehicles, automated vehicles, electric vehicles, and hybrids, adaptive traffic signals, and these are ones that change the amount of green time based on the number of cars that are coming, managed lanes, so looking at using different lanes or different directionality of lanes throughout the day, variable message signs, that could be the parking signs mentioned earlier, or even signs that tell people to take a certain route because of traffic. Even things such as 3D printing and drones, microtransit, like Phyllis mentioned, bike share, these are all transformational technologies. So next. So our focus here, though, is really looking at what we're calling mobility as a service. And this is basically looking at transportation as a utility and not just something that's private ownership. So think of it as moving away from each person owning their own vehicle to using different mobility options to meet the travel demand. So as an example, imagine if you're buying a TV and you get basic cable, right? So you have limited number of shows, they're only provided at a certain time, and if you miss it, you can't watch it again. But compare that if you sign up for a streaming service like Netflix or Amazon, where you have multiple different choices, you can choose when and where and how you want to see those shows. That's the way we want to look at transportation moving forward. Next. So this is already, to a certain extent, being implemented throughout Southern California and in LA County as well. This includes dedicated parking spaces for car share vehicles. It includes dedicated spaces for Ubers and Lyfts, places to plug in your car for if you have an electric vehicle, designated scooter parking and bike share parking, like Phyllis mentioned. So we're already starting to see some of these out there on the physical side. And then we're also looking at some more advances in terms of transportation automation as well. So as you've probably heard, Amazon has been experimenting with drones that can deliver packages. I'm not quite sure how this is going to work out yet, but the great thing with this is that it takes vehicles off the road and provides new opportunities to deliver goods. We've been seeing now more of this, and it's going to be continuing in the future, how vehicles are getting smarter. So not only can Teslas sometimes not very well, but sometimes park themselves or move from a parking space to the person who's ordering them. Cars will soon be able to talk to each other in the infrastructure. So the example here is if you're driving this car, you get a warning light on the right that this car is saying basically my driver's turning on the turn signal, so your car can start braking right now to give them space to move over. Or you can see above that it's getting information from a variable message sign saying traffic's ahead, so the car will start slowing down for you. Once again, all these things are really looking at improving safety and improving efficiency of the roadway network. So next. And here's a kind of a fun example, because we're looking to see how these kind of transformational technologies are going to change the way we design streets and design curbs. So if for example, if we have a fleet of automated vehicles, we may not need to provide as much parking because these automated vehicles will be traveling around throughout the day and not need to sit there, right? And then also we would have to look at curbs. So if you had just streets that Phyllis was showing earlier, but now we have more of a connected environment, maybe we would have a separate even drop-off lane for automated vehicles. They could then pull in safely, pick up their passengers and drive away. So these are the kind of things we're starting to look at now in terms of designing our curb spaces. So we're still, though, in the process of identifying what are the impacts. As I've said, they're starting to be rolled out, but we still have a long way to go to have a true kind of mobility as a service mentality. So we're still doing research as to what are going to be the effects of these and how it's going to change our land use patterns, how it's going to change our codes and standards, and how it's going to change how people move. But one thing we do know is that the applications of the technologies will have a greater impact than the actual technologies itself, because these applications change every day and the market's still trying to figure out who's going to be the winners and the losers. So as an example, about a year ago, a lot of cities implemented dockless bike share. So these were locations kind of like Phyllis had shown, where instead of scooters, these are bikes, and the same kind of issues, people were just throwing the bikes everywhere, but that's what everybody was trying to do. Now they're not going in at all. People have moved over into scooters. The point is they're still looking at mobility options, but they're not being wedded to a specific technology. In addition, Uber and Lyft, to be honest, they don't really have sustainable business models. And especially in today's environment where people are afraid of taking shared ride services, those two companies themselves may not be along, but the idea of shared ride services is something that's going to last. So when we plan for our cities, we need to be not thinking about just the actual physical, it's an Uber, it's a Lyft, it's a Lime Bike, but what are we trying to achieve and making sure that we're accommodating those. So studies have been, though, varied about what the effects are going to be. We've been doing research on automated vehicles. In reality, the results are all over the place. Some people are thinking that automated vehicles are going to increase congestion because you'll now have a fleet of cars driving around, picking up and dropping people throughout the day, so people don't need to walk or bike anymore. Other people are saying that this is going to cut down a lot on congestion, because now you don't have to search around looking for a parking space. You can have a car just to pick you up and drop you off without any kind of additional travel. There's debate as to will it increase the capacity of freeways or not. And a lot of this really comes down to how these systems are going to be deployed, how people are going to use them, and what policies cities are going to do to address them and to control them. All these are interrelated, and it's really going to affect how we start planning for cities and rural areas, and for housing and for jobs. So next. So finally, because these technologies are evolving so rapidly, what do we do? How do we plan for this? What does Baldwin Park do, and how do we incorporate this kind of thing into our plans moving forward? First thing we need to do is we need to do a self-assessment and identify the agency's readiness for these type of new technologies. What are the current plans and standards and regulations, and how could those potentially be adjusted to account for these new technologies? Second is get data. Regularly collect and monitor land use and travel data. This can be anything from your basic traffic counts to OD surveys using some big data sources, looking at speeds, looking at parking occupancy, like we mentioned earlier, right? Getting that information, getting smart, doing the research, bringing in experts to talk about technology, infrastructure needs, Wi-Fi needs, all those type of things to figure out what each city needs to have in-house in order to plan for these things. And then finally, at the end of the day, we all have to be nimble. We need to create performance-based plans rather than just facility-based plans. So as Phyllis showed earlier, instead of planning for a specific street type, we should be planning out what's our throughput. What are we trying to achieve with this roadway? What kind of people are we trying to accommodate, and design the road and the road standards around that, rather than kind of the antiquated notion of this needs to be a major arterial or this facility needs to be a highway. Maybe we can start looking at it as this facility needs to move 20,000 people a day, and this facility needs to move 5,000 people a day. And then lastly, and this is an important thing too, and Baldwin Park is looking at this right now, is agencies need to just plan more frequently. We need to look at long-term visions like we're doing for this project, a 20-year plan for the revision of the downtown area, but we need to start breaking it down into smaller increments so that we can start accommodating these changes. And we talked about that the last couple of days, especially Vinayak, when he was looking at how these different properties can adjust over time, is start looking at the transportation network that needs to be supporting that, looking at how these new technologies could affect things, and making sure that we're planning accordingly. And with that, we are closing up shop on mobility and parking.
Thank you, Tim and Phyllis. Just quite a lot of information to process. For those of you listening again, if you'd like to make any comments or questions regarding the presentation, just raise your hand and we'll go ahead and unmute you, or feel free to submit your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Oh, we got Mayor Pro Tem Paul Hernandez. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Go ahead. Hello, Paul.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
Thank you. Again, thank you very much for the presentation. Very informative and quite educational. The item I'd like for staff to, really drill down and consider is, the parking allocations and the studies, and of course the curve outs in regards to how we use, our curves. As mentioned in the study, or as an example, there are multi-use ways of using them for drop-offs, for bike lanes, for also outdoor cafes, on a non-permanent basis, and for other, special events that we do throughout the city. So if we can continue to look at that and really understand that, for at least, have a better presentation, or have another presentation further down the pipeline for the council, I think we'd appreciate that as we begin to, drill down and provide not only a 5-year vision, but a 20-year vision for how, we're going to be using and maximizing our streets. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Yes, we'll definitely get in touch with our Public Works Department, and that's definitely something we're going to be looking at to study more, and we'll bring that back to the council for review. Looks like we have Francisco Pila. Go ahead. Hello, Francisco, can you hear us? Looks like we're having Marquisa unmuted.
Yes, he is.
Okay, Francisco, it looks like we're having some difficulties. If you could submit your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Looks like we have Planning Commissioner Christopher Garrido. Garrido, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Ron. Hey, I just wanted to thank Kaiser and his team for all the insight. It's been great this 3-day charrette to, basically see, Baldwin Park trying to move forward and, make some great changes in this city. One of the things I had about parking, obviously, that's what we were discussing today. And just a question about, would it be more feasible? Is there to be able to build maybe another parking structure and then, minimize all those other types of parking spaces? I mean, would that be something to consider, just from that standpoint?
Yeah, Ron, let me take a stab at this from the number standpoint, and then feel free to chime in from a city standpoint. So I think it's definitely possible that you could consolidate a lot of the current parking, public parking in particular, and put it into a structure. It's definitely feasible. It's definitely what a lot of other cities have been doing, and that way you can free up that space. The one thing we would say is building structured parking is very expensive. And when we were talking a little bit about kind of the new technologies as well, if we go into an environment that is more of that mobility as a service, a more shared vehicle type of things, there may not be that need for as much dedicated parking spaces in 10, 20 years. So one thing that we've been suggesting to cities, if they are going to look to build structured parking, is to design it in a way that it could be repurposed later. So as an example, sometimes parking garages have relatively short heights. So it's only maybe 7 feet or 8 feet between the parking surface and then the roof structure above. But that's not big enough to do anything else with it. So if you extend that by a couple feet, you could later on theoretically drop in a roof and HVAC, and then you'd repurpose that space into something else. Or if you have a parking garage that's a continual ramp type of structure where the floors are never flat, then you really couldn't do anything with that either. So if you're designing it in a way that it could be repurposed. It could be repurposed into office space or some light industrial spaces or sports space or something else. So those are the kind of two things that we would look at. Is one is, what's that demand? Where's the people coming from and going to? And can you provide a parking garage in a location that's convenient for everybody? And then two, if you do one, how can you design it to have a life cycle over and above what it may be needed just for regular parking?
No, to add to that, Tim, and also to answer some of your comments, Commissioner Garrido, one point that you mentioned, that smart technology, the parking structure that's adjacent to City Hall actually does exactly what you mentioned, where it takes count. So as you're driving up and pulling into the parking structure, it tells you exactly how many spaces are free. What's really neat, and I don't know if that's possible, I'm sure it is, where you can tie that in, like you mentioned, through an app based, where if someone's going to be visiting, they can check to see, is there any parking, and they can plan ahead to see maybe there's another consolidated a parking lot in the downtown that they can park at, other than the parking structure. But it is a good point, especially it is going to require us to really study and how we consolidate those parking areas that are unused, that can be repurposed for those pedestrian amenities, for outdoor dining or some parklets, to not have to build another parking structure in the downtown, but utilize what we have already and enhance it.
Thank you, Ron. And thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Looks like we got some comments that just came in. Thank you, Rogelio. In your parking study, you combine the public and private parking slot availabilities. Is there a specific reason for combining the two? As I would guess that private parking would not be able to be changed or be transformed in private residence, especially parking stalls dedicated to apartment residences.
Yeah, so we looked at parking, we looked at both. So we have information broken out by both public spaces and private spaces. One of the reasons why we like showing that graphic is to illustrate that even the private parking, so let's say the parking for the shopping center, is still not highly utilized, which means that they are providing more parking than they may need. Now, we understand that there's code requirements. A lot of commercial centers have parking requirements of 4 or 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. So there are restrictions and limits to how much parking people need to provide. But we wanted to just illustrate the fact that there are spaces available on a public side and a private side. To kind of answer the second part of the question as well, and we talked about this a little bit last night, is that parking for residences, if you want to kind of what we're calling it unbundled parking, it means that you don't automatically get a parking space if you get a unit. You want to have that be a separate charge. And that way people can weigh the cost benefit analysis of having a car and that parking space versus not. And you're not penalizing people who don't have a car. So if each apartment comes with a parking space, but you don't own a car, you just don't use that space. So you're paying extra money for the upkeep and maintenance of that space, even though you're never using it. So by unbundling it, having it more of a buffet type of a thing, you're then able to pick and choose what you want to have, and then you pay for it. So if there's cases where people aren't using all the private parking, those spaces could be rented out to other businesses, or it could even be made available to the public. So that's part of that overall parking management plan we want to look at is what's the most effective use of those parking spaces? How can you improve the efficiency? But then also looking at the city plans and policies, what really is allowable, what's not allowable, and what may need to be changed in order to facilitate this.
Thank you, Tim. Looks like Francisco did submit a comment. This is a good question. Where does the outreach fall into the conversation that potentially changing the community's preconceived notions on bus transit or shared bikes?
That's a great comment. I'll take a shot at this. This is a visioning scenario right now. So we're coming up with potential ideas that as through the Charrette, we're kind of vetting with the public as a first go around. Any implementation would obviously have additional community outreach and engagement to justify and determine if it's a priority for the community or not. But this is really just a high level, here are some really great ideas of how other agencies are looking at their public transportation system as well as their multimodal system. And honestly, if you see something today that you love or you hate, like we want to hear that feedback, because that's something that helps the city know, hey, these are on the table for the future, or these are completely off the table for the future.
Thank you, Phyllis.
Yeah.
All right. Again, if you would like to make any comments, just please raise your hand or submit them in the Q&A or in the chat box. All right, looks like we haven't got any comments in. Anyone raising their hand? Kaiser, do you want to share with us, lead us into this evening's presentation?
Yes, thank you. This evening, the presentation is at 4:30, and this will be our final presentation for the Charrette. We hope to present, and by the way, if you're just joining us and this is your very first foray into the Charrette and you haven't been with us for the last 2 days, don't worry. We'll walk you through and we have through our presentation, we'll discuss some of the work that we've done leading up to this point, but then also have new information to present based on the feedback that we have received in the last two or 3 days. But we hope to present a very comprehensive array of topics, everything from urban design, mobility, and parking strategy to getting into implementation related to how do you finance, how do you pay for this, what are some of options available to the city, as well as looking at coding as a tool for implementation. What are some of the initial framework ideas that we have for that? So we'll be presenting that at 4:30, starting 4:30 today. So encourage you to participate. And if you know some people that might be interested but are not on this talk, please let them know. Particularly of the change timing. We're starting at 4:30 and not at 6. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Kaiser. Thank you, everybody, for Tim, Phyllis, for that great presentation on mobility. I have to tell you, one favorite of mine is the example from Seattle, where you have those different types. I've seen that in San Francisco, and it creates that unique sense of place when you go visit a city. I truly believe if you put it, people will come and visit and experience, because that doesn't exist. You can't find that everywhere. It's why people tend to visit those cities, because they're getting that unique experience. And it's great seeing that you can repurpose those the curbs and the streets in that way. But thank you, everybody. Those are my final comments. But one last call, if you guys want to submit any questions before we end our last noon presentation. And thank you again for all the feedback and joining us these 3 days. All right, seeing none. Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you this evening at 4:30.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.